I'm sitting on the front steps of a little yellow house, watching my younger half-sister, Megan, load the last of her boxes into a rented truck. 2 years ago, I gave her the key because she said she needed a place to breathe. Last month, she told our family I was selfish for not signing the house over to her. Today, she is leaving with the same key in an envelope, and I finally understand something. Some people do not want your help. They want your life. My name is Emma. The house in front of me is small, older than it looks, and painted a soft yellow that my Aunt Ruth used to call Buttercup. It sits at the end of a quiet street with a narrow driveway, a porch that creaks in the cold, and a little room in the back that used to be her sewing space. When Aunt Ruth passed away, she left the house to me. That surprised a lot of people. My mother thought Ruth would leave it to her. My stepfather thought it should be sold and split. My half-sister Megan thought the whole thing was unfair because she had 2 children and I did not. But Ruth had written everything clearly. She left me the house, her old recipe box, and a note folded inside the front drawer of her desk. It said, "You always noticed what other people needed. I want you to have something that notices you back." I kept that note for months without telling anyone. At the time, I did not know how much I would need it. The house was not fancy. It had old windows, stubborn pipes, and a kitchen floor that sloped slightly toward the sink. But to me, it felt steady. It was the one place in the family that had never asked me to prove myself. Aunt Ruth had made tea there after my breakups, after bad work days, after every holiday where I felt like the extra chair at the table. So when Megan called me crying one evening, I picked up. Her husband, Kyle, had lost his job. Their rent had gone up. Their landlord was selling the unit. She said they only needed somewhere for a few months, just until Kyle found work again. I remember standing in my apartment kitchen, holding the phone against my ear, listening to her breathe like she was trying not to fall apart. Then my mother called. She said, "Emma, this is what family is for." I believed her. I drove to the yellow house the next morning. I opened the door, walked through each room, and imagined Megan's kids sleeping where Aunt Ruth used to keep stacks of fabric. I felt a little ache in my chest, but I told myself that was just grief. Houses were meant to be used. Families were meant to help. So I gave Megan the key. No lease. No rent. No written plan. Just a promise. 3 months, maybe 4. At first, Megan was grateful. She hugged me in the driveway and kept saying, "You're saving us." Her kids ran through the empty rooms, laughing at the echo. Kyle shook my hand and said he would fix the loose porch rail as a thank you. For a while, it felt like I had done the right thing. I paid the property taxes. I kept the insurance in my name. I covered the first utility deposit because Megan said money was tight that week. I did not mind. I told myself I was lucky to have something to give. The first request came after 6 weeks. The washing machine stopped mid-cycle, and Megan texted me a picture of wet towels sitting in the tub. She said she could not be expected to take laundry to a laundromat with 2 kids. I bought a new machine. Then the back door stuck. Then the water heater made a noise. Then the living room carpet was not good for the children's allergies. I paid for repairs because the house was mine, and I wanted it cared for. That was the sentence I used to excuse everything. The house is mine, so it is my responsibility. But slowly, the words changed. Megan stopped asking if I could help and started asking when things would be done. She sent links to paint colors. She said the kitchen looked dated. She said the fence made the yard feel depressing. She asked if I could replace the blinds because the neighbors could see in at night. When I said I needed to look at my budget, she went quiet. Then my mother would call. "She's under a lot of stress, Emma." I heard that sentence so many times it started to feel like a family password. If Megan was stressed, I was supposed to open my wallet. If Kyle was embarrassed, I was supposed to be patient. If the kids were uncomfortable, I was supposed to feel ashamed. Nobody asked if I was stressed. Nobody asked what it felt like to work overtime, pay my own rent, and still pay for a house I could not enter without warning Megan first. The first time I realized something had shifted was on a Saturday morning. I drove by the house to drop off a box of Aunt Ruth's old dishes. Megan was on the porch with a woman I did not know. They were pointing at the front windows and laughing. When I walked up, Megan smiled too brightly and introduced me as the owner for now. For now. I stood there with the box in my arms and felt something cold move through me. The woman was from a local design company. Megan had asked for an estimate on replacing the porch, widening the driveway, and converting the back sewing room into a bedroom for her oldest son. I said, Megan, we didn't talk about any of this. She tilted her head like I had embarrassed her. It was just an estimate. But her tone said something else. It said, why are you acting like this is still yours? That night, I opened my laptop and looked through my bank statements. I started adding up everything I had paid since Megan moved in. Taxes, insurance, utilities, repairs, appliances, paint, emergency cash transfers, groceries once, school supplies twice, a birthday party deposit because Megan said she could not disappoint her daughter. The number made me sit back in my chair. I stared at it for a long time. It was not just money. It was proof. Proof that a few months had become 2 years. Proof that temporary had become normal. Proof that my kindness had turned into a system nobody wanted to question because everyone benefited from it except me. Still, I did nothing. That is the part one I'm not proud of. I told myself I was avoiding drama. I told myself the kids were innocent. I told myself that asking for rent would make me look greedy. I told myself a lot of things because the truth was harder. The truth was I was afraid. I was afraid of being called cold. Afraid of my mother's disappointment. Afraid of becoming the family story people whispered about at Thanksgiving. Emma got that house and suddenly thought she was better than us. So I stayed quiet. And quiet people are easy to build on. The breaking point came because of a lunch invitation. My mother called on a Thursday and said she wanted us all to have Sunday lunch. She sounded cheerful, almost careful. She said it had been too long since we sat down like a family. She said Megan wanted to clear the air. I wanted to believe that. I brought a pie from the bakery near my apartment. I remember that detail because I held it in my lap the whole drive, trying to convince myself this was going to be simple. Maybe Megan would apologize. Maybe we would make a plan. Maybe everyone would finally admit that 2 years was longer than anyone expected. When I walked into my mother's dining room, I knew. There were too many chairs. Megan and Kyle were already sitting together. My stepfather was at the head of the table. My mother had printed papers beside her plate. Megan's children were not there. That told me everything. This was not lunch. This was a meeting. My mother hugged me with one arm and took the pie from my hands. Then she said, let's eat first. We did not eat first. Megan started talking before the plates were full. She said the kids were settled now. She said moving would disrupt their school. She said Kyle had finally found steady work nearby. She said the house had become their home. I nodded because those things were true. Then she said, so we think it makes sense to put the house in our name. The room went quiet. I looked at my mother. She looked down at the papers. Megan continued, like she had rehearsed it. She said she did not expect me to give it away for free. She said they could pay me something small each month, once things improved. She said it would be better for everyone because I did not live there anyway. My stepfather cleared his throat. You have your apartment. You have your job. You're not the one raising a family. There it was. The old family math. My needs counted less because they were quieter. My bills counted less because I paid them on time. My future counted less because I did not have children sitting at the table as evidence. I asked, are you asking to buy the house? Megan looked offended. We're asking you to do the right thing. That sentence did something to me. Not because it was loud. It was not. Megan said it softly, almost kindly, like she was guiding me toward decency. I looked at the papers beside my mother's plate. They were not a lease. They were not a repayment plan. They were transfer documents. Not complete ones, but close enough to show intent. My mother finally spoke. No one is trying to pressure you. I almost laughed. There were 4 adults in the room, printed papers on the table, and a pie cooling in the kitchen that nobody had touched. I said, this feels like pressure. Megan's face changed. The softness left first. Then the patience. Then the gratitude. She leaned back in her chair and said, you know what? This is exactly why people say you're selfish. I waited for my mother to correct her. She did not. Kyle stared at his plate. My stepfather folded his arms. My mother pressed her lips together like silence was the most peaceful option. That silence hurt more than Megan's words. Because Megan wanted the house. Kyle wanted stability. My stepfather wanted the conflict to end in the easiest way possible. But my mother knew me. She knew how many times I had said yes to keep the room calm. She knew the cost of those yes. And still, she let them turn me into the problem. Megan kept talking. She said Aunt Ruth would have wanted the house filled with children. She said I was clinging to something I did not need. She said I had always acted like being responsible made me special. I set my napkin on the table. My hands were shaking, so I put them in my lap. Then my mother said, "Emma, honey, just think about it. No one is saying you have to decide today." But that was not comfort. That was strategy. They had decided before I arrived. They only needed me to surrender slowly enough to call it a choice. I stood up. Megan said, "So you're just leaving?" I looked at her, then at the papers, then at my mother. "Yes," I said. "I am." No speech. No crying. No slammed door. I just left. On the drive home, I did not turn on the radio. I let the silence sit beside me. At every red light, I heard Megan's voice again. Selfish. It is strange how one word can cut through years of memory. Suddenly I saw every moment differently. Every favor I had called love. Every request I had called temporary. Every time my mother had said, "Be patient," when what she meant was, "Be useful." By the time I reached my apartment, I was not angry anymore. I was clear. I took out a notebook and wrote the date at the top of the page. Then I wrote one sentence. What has this cost me? I started with money because numbers do not get guilt-tripped. I listed the taxes, insurance, repairs, deposits, appliances, and transfers. Then I listed the other costs. Weekends lost. Work calls taken from contractor parking lots. The anxiety of every message from Megan. The way my stomach tightened whenever my mother's name appeared on my phone. That list was longer. At the bottom of the page, I wrote another sentence. I do not need their permission to stop. The next morning, I called an attorney named Mr. Bell. He had helped me years earlier with a contract issue at work. His office was above a pharmacy, and it smelled faintly like paper and coffee. I brought every document I had. The will. The deed. Tax records. Insurance statements. Repair invoices. Screenshots of Megan saying the move was temporary. He read quietly. Then he looked up and said, "Emma, this is your property." I nodded. He said it again, slower. "This is your property. You allowed them to stay. That does not mean you gave it away." I did not realize how badly I needed someone outside the family to say that. Because inside my family, ownership had become a moral flaw. The house was mine only when there was a bill. When there was value, it became everyone's. When there was responsibility, it returned to me. Mr. Bell explained the process. We would send formal notice. We would keep it polite. We would not argue about family feelings inside legal documents. The arrangement was ending and Megan would have a clear deadline to leave. I expected to feel cruel. Instead, I felt tired. Not sad, not triumphant, just tired in the way you feel after carrying something heavy and realizing you are allowed to put it down. The notice went out that Friday. Megan called me Monday morning. I did not answer. She called again, then texted. "What is this? Are you serious? You sent legal papers to your own sister?" I waited until lunch and replied with one sentence. The arrangement was temporary, and it is ending. She called again. This time I answered. Her voice was high and sharp. She said I had humiliated her. She said Kyle was furious. She said the kids would be devastated. She said I should have talked to her like family. I let her finish. Then I said I tried. "You brought transfer papers to lunch." There was a pause. She said that was Mom's idea. I closed my eyes. It was the first honest thing she had said, and even that was meant to shift blame. I said, "Then Mom can explain why she thought that was acceptable." Megan started crying. Or maybe she wanted me to think she was crying. I could hear the effort in it. She said, "Where are we supposed to go?" I said, "You have the deadline and the notice." "You really don't care?" That question almost worked. Almost. Because the old version of me would have rushed in to prove I cared. She would have softened her voice, offered more time, maybe apologized for the pain of enforcing a boundary. But that version of me had been trained to confuse caring with surrender. So I said, I care. I'm still not giving you my house. The line went quiet. Then she said, you've changed. I looked at Aunt Ruth's note, still pinned to the board above my desk. Yes, I said. I have. The next few weeks were not peaceful, but they were honest. My mother called every evening for 4 days. I answered once. She said Megan had spoken out of stress. She said transfer papers were only an idea. She said I was making something permanent out of one bad lunch. I asked her, did you know about the papers before I arrived? She went quiet. That was the answer. I said, then it wasn't one bad lunch. She whispered, I was trying to keep everyone together. I said, no. You were trying to keep everyone comfortable. Those are not the same thing. She cried then. I did not. That surprised me. I had always thought my mother's tears were a door I had to walk through. This time, they were just tears. I could care that she was upset without handing her the deed to my aunt's house. My stepfather sent one text. You're going too far. I wrote back. No. I'm going home. He did not respond. Megan tried different approaches. Anger first. Then guilt. Then old memories. She sent pictures of the kids in the yard, as if I had forgotten they existed. She sent a long message about how hard her life had been since her father left. She said I had always had things easier because I was alone. That line stayed with me. Because being alone had never made my life easier. It had only made my struggles less visible. There was no one at my table to prove I needed help. No children in the background of my calls. No husband's lost job to make my bills sound urgent. So everyone assumed I was fine. Fine is a dangerous word. It can erase a person. The final confrontation happened 12 days before the deadline. I was coming home from work when I saw Megan's car outside my apartment building. My mother sat in the passenger seat. Kyle stood near the entrance with his hands in his pockets. For a second, I considered driving past. Then I parked. Megan walked toward me before I reached the door. You need to stop this, she said. I unlocked the building door and said no. She followed me into the small lobby. My mother came in behind her. Kyle stayed outside, staring at the pavement. Megan said, do you understand what this looks like? I turned around. That question again. Not what this is. Not what they did. What it looks like. I said, it looks like I asked you to leave a house you do not own. Her face tightened. You gave it to us. I let you stay there. For 2 years. Yes, I said. That was generous. My mother flinched at that word. Generous. It had been missing from every conversation. They had called me lucky, stable, single, selfish, dramatic. But no one had called me generous, because that would mean admitting I had already given something. Megan said, Aunt Ruth would be ashamed of you. That one landed. For a moment, the lobby blurred around the edges. Then I remembered the note. Something that notices you back. I said, Aunt Ruth left the house to me. Megan rolled her eyes. Because you were her favorite. No, I said. Because she knew I would take care of it. My mother stepped forward. Emma, please. There has to be a compromise. I looked at her. There was. It was called temporary. No one spoke. I continued, you all treated my help like a waiting room for ownership. You lived there, I paid for it, and somehow I became the selfish one because I would not disappear from the paperwork. Megan's mouth opened, then closed. Kyle finally came inside. He said, we can pay rent. I looked at him. For the first time, he sounded ashamed. I asked, why did you not offer that before the legal notice? He looked away. That was also an answer. My mother said, people make mistakes. I said, yes. And sometimes the consequence is that access ends. Megan shook her head. You're punishing us. No, I said. Punishment would be me trying to hurt you. I am trying to stop being hurt. That sentence changed the room. Not because they accepted it. They did not. But because I did. I had spent so long defending my boundary as if it needed to be gentle enough for the people crossing it. Standing there, under the weak lobby light, I finally understood that a boundary does not have to sound warm to be fair. Megan wiped her face. You'll regret this. Maybe she meant I would miss them. Maybe she meant the family would turn against me. Maybe she meant I would feel lonely at holidays. Maybe all of that was true. But regret is not the same as guilt. I said maybe. But I won't keep paying for peace that only works when I stay silent. They left after that. The last 12 days were strange. Quiet, but not peaceful. I slept better and worse at the same time. Some nights I woke up certain I was cruel. Other nights I woke up angry that I had ever questioned myself. On the final day, I drove to the yellow house and parked across the street. Megan had already loaded most of the truck. The porch looked bare without the chairs she had bought. The kids were not there. I was grateful for that. Whatever Megan thought of me, I did not want them to carry the weight of adult choices. Kyle brought out the last boxes. He did not look at me. My mother arrived halfway through and stood near the curb, holding her purse with both hands. She looked older than she had at lunch. Megan came out last. She had an envelope in her hand. She walked across the street and placed it on the hood of my car. For a second, her fingers stayed there. I rolled down the window. She said, "You got what you wanted." I looked at the house. The peeling porch. The crooked mailbox. The windows Aunt Ruth used to open every morning. Then I looked back at Megan. "No," I said. "I got back what was mine." She waited, maybe for an apology. I did not give one. She turned and walked away. After the truck left, I sat there for a few minutes before going inside. The house smelled like cardboard, dust, and lemon cleaner. It was not destroyed, but it was tired. The walls had marks. The back room had half-finished shelves. The yard needed work. The porch rail Kyle had promised to fix 2 years earlier still wobbled under my hand. I walked from room to room, touching the door frames. I expected to feel victory. I did not. I felt grief. Not for the house. The house could be repaired. I grieved the version of my family I had protected in my mind. The mother who would stand up for me when it mattered. The sister who would remember gratitude after the crisis passed. The idea that if I gave enough, I would finally become impossible to dismiss. That illusion left the house before Megan did. I spent the next month repairing things slowly. I painted the kitchen a clean white. I replaced the porch rail. I cleaned the back room and turned it into a small office again. On the last day, I found one of Aunt Ruth's buttons wedged between 2 floorboards. Small, brown, ordinary. I held it in my palm and cried for the first time. Then I laughed because Aunt Ruth had always said buttons were proof that little things hold important things together. I did not move into the house. Instead, I rented it to a woman named Carla, a middle school teacher who showed up with references, a steady voice, and a folder so organized it almost made me smile. She walked through the house carefully, asking before opening closets. When I told her about the old sewing room, she said she might use it to grade papers. Before she left, she looked around the kitchen and said, "This place feels cared for." That sentence gave me more peace than any apology would have. The first rent payment arrived on time. So did the second. No drama. No guilt. No emergency wrapped in family language. Just a simple agreement, respected by both sides. My mother did not call for a while. Megan blocked me, then unblocked me, then blocked me again. My stepfather pretended none of it had happened. And me? I started sleeping through the night. I stopped flinching when my phone buzzed. I stopped explaining my no before I said it. I stopped measuring my worth by how much inconvenience I could absorb without complaint. That was the part no one warned me about. Boundaries do not just change how other people treat you. They change how you hear yourself. The first few times you say no, it sounds harsh. Then it starts to sound honest. Then, one day, it sounds like peace. I still love my family. But love is not a deed transfer. Love is not unpaid rent. Love is not being cornered at a dining table and asked to sign away the only thing someone left in your name. Love without respect is just access. And access can end. So if you are listening to this and wondering whether you are selfish for finally protecting something that belongs to you, let me say this as clearly as I can. You are allowed to help people without handing them your future. You are allowed to love your family without funding their comfort. You are allowed to say, "This was temporary," even if they built their plans around you never saying it. And you are allowed to grieve after doing the right thing. Because peace does not always arrive with a smile. Sometimes it arrives in an empty house, with dust on the floor, an envelope on the hood of your car, and a key that finally comes back to your hand. That day, I did not lose my sister. I lost the role she needed me to play. And when I unlocked the yellow house again, I realized Aunt Ruth had been right. Some places do notice you back, but only after you stop giving the key to people who never plan to return it.